So when your DSP announced at NAMM that they were going to be creating hardware, I think the idea was that they'd be quite a big player in this game and they were intending to be a big disruptor. It's a few years on now, and I think the Quad Cortex has changed in a fair amount of ways, that it's very much different from launch and more pleasing to me from launch, which was when I first had one. I did some reviews and some videos, and at the time I was a little bit, possibly, there were things that were missing that for me needed to be in there. Now, game changing is a big word to throw around, right? And I think this is part of what has made the Quad Cortex quite divisive in some ways, because there's a lot of factionism within the modelling world. You know, there's a fight for modelling supremacy and all of this sort of stuff. So that aside, I wanted to look at what it is that the Quad Cortex may or may not have done, which would have or has changed the game. So the first thing to say is that of all the modelling devices out there, this has to be the smallest, most powerful one, right? You know, as a form factor, I think that's quite a beautiful thing. I don't know that it's the optimal size for kind of live use. The foot switches here are quite close together. They're very nicely spaced this way, but the vertical spacing is quite close. The lack of something like scribble strips, which I find incredibly useful live. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with any of this, or let me know how the Quad Cortex has changed your kind of gigging life and stuff. But to have something like, you know, this small that could fit in a gig bag and is yet more powerful than almost any of the other floor modelers out there, I think that's quite an achievement. And as well as looking super pretty, it's a cool piece of kit, right, from that regard. The second thing that they've done, that has anyone else done this, but the integration with Wi-Fi and stuff like that. So, you know, if you go into settings, we can connect to Wi-Fi routers, and this is how you do things like update the device and all that sort of stuff, and you can share stuff to the cloud. And I think the cloud has been their biggest kind of innovation in a way, to the detriment of a couple of things. So, you know, there's no PC editor and there's no way to load presets or IRs on to the device kind of without being connected to the cloud, which is potentially not the greatest setup, right? Because say you had a studio for whatever reason that is not connected to the internet, then maybe you'd want to be able to load stuff locally or with a USB stick or with a device or whatever. Similarly, you know, there's venues that I play around the UK that are not in particularly good areas for internet, and you know, you might not have a public Wi-Fi spot that you can hop onto. So there's a little bit of a, what would you call that? I don't know. Is that a blind spot? I don't know. It's just an issue to be aware of at the moment. I don't know if you could call it an innovation to have a touch screen, because Headrush have been doing it for a while. The Hotone Ampero could also do it, but I think this is quite an attractive touchscreen comparatively. The Headrush one I didn't feel like looked quite as sort of high quality, and part of that has to do with the Helix interface, doesn't it? Other key innovations, I think this cab block has been an interesting one, just because I think that's a really novel way to sort of represent the problem of the cab. Now, I think they're actually working on a simpler cab block, or that was something that they were working on a while ago, but I really like this as a setup. You know, you've got this kind of representation of where the microphone is around the cone, and I think that's an incredibly simple way to organize what is essentially just a bunch of lists, isn't it? So, you know, like within the fractal world, the cabs, they are just a list of IRs, a few sorting methods, like you sort by microphone, you can sort by cab and this sort of stuff. In the stock cabs, this is, because those are essentially IR based as well. But this, I think, is, as far as I've seen so far, the best solution for solving the cab problem with a modeler. Another way that Neural kind of changed the game, to be able to have more than one capture in a preset. So, of course, you know about the Kemper. The thing with the Kemper is that you can load one profile at a time, of course, right? And this is a thing I've said for a little while. One of the things that I missed when I was using my Kemper was that in the Helix, or, you know, when I used to record with the Kemper as well, I would actually reamp back through the Kemper to get another amp tone on top of it, so you can, you know, blend certain tones, and that can yield some really interesting results. The Quad Cortex, you can actually load multiple captures into the same preset. So you could have a capture of a Morgan AC20, you could have a capture of a Dude pedal, and you can, you know, load multiples of these in. That's a little bit of a, I think, a game changer and a little bit of an innovation that is, you know, worth celebrating in some ways. And, you know, that's also what has led to people where they haven't really done this so much with the Kemper unless it's kind of baked in front of the amp, kind of breaking up the signal chain a bit more and, you know, taking captures of certain drive pedals and certain amps, preamps, compressors even, all that sort of stuff. But basically two things that have made me change my mind to some extent on the Quad Cortex. So the first is that there's now a looper. So if we go into stomp mode, I've done videos specifically looking into it, but the other is we've got these freeze capabilities. So a really nice looper, and these freeze things to me really open up practice and the ability to kind of make interesting sounds from a modeler that you can't generally do too easily with traditional kind of pedal boards and stuff like that without you know, having specific pedals that can do this thing like the EHX Freeze or the Gamechanger Audio Plus. There's no marketplace yet, which is why I think you don't see more people necessarily raving about it. It's a bit cynical in my opinion, but at some point you're going to see people saying that this is the new best thing because they can sell presets on it. So something to watch out for. Things that I would like to see, instead of having to put an adaptive gate kind of in every place, I'd like to see that built into the input potentially, like it is on the Helix or in the fractal space. I think this using up a valuable kind of block is not optimal. Aside from that, I think basically it's at a stage, once they sort out this hybrid kind of scene stomp mode where you can kind of mix things up and match them, I think we're about where you would want to be honest. It's not perfect yet. What I would need to see from the Quad Cortex before I could reasonably gig it would be to have a hybrid mode. So at the moment you can only have stomp preset or scene mode. Now I don't need 8 scenes for a gig, I need 4. But it is nice to also have the ability to change stomps. So what I would personally be going for would be to have, like I do on the Helix, sort of snapshots or scenes along the bottom here and stomps along the top here that I could assign. That would be an interesting and I think crucial development. I think they're calling this hybrid mode and I think it is coming. That won't be a game changer, that'll just be making it sort of on par with some of the other devices that are out there. Like, still, I guess, this idea of being able to plug into a PC editor, that sort of stuff, I don't think it's necessarily a huge issue at the moment because it is quite an easy interface to use and quite a nice size. But I definitely think people are looking for this PC editor. The other thing that is not clear how it's going to be solved is this loading of neural plugins. So part of the reason that people were so excited about the Quad Cortex in general was the idea that they'd be able to load in their favorite neural plugins and get those tones on the floor, which is basically essentially what I think a massive part of the interest in the Quad Cortex was in the first place. It's like, well, I really like the sound of Neural DSP's Plenty or Nolly or Corey Wong at the time. To be able to get that stuff at my feet would be a great solution. However, we've not seen that part of the game change, and I'd be interested to see when it does come how they're going to solve it, because it's not going to be able to look the same. And I think that's part of the reason that the neural plugins have been quite successful or very successful, is because it's got a simplified workflow compared to a normal kind of modeling device. Now, if it is the case that you just can pull up Pliny Amp 1 and Pliny Reverb and Pliny Delay, then as like options within the block list, then I'm not sure that that's going to particularly solve the issue of kind of matching those things. So to me, there seems to be like a bit of it's an almost impossible problem to solve, because you're mixing two things. One is very simple, the plugins. One can be very complex, the Quad Cortex, complex signal routing. So interesting to see if they are able to bridge that gap and solve that problem. What I really like about the Quad Cortex is that you don't necessarily even have to go down that route, because you can mix both this capturing and this building from scratch approach. And I actually prefer to use the amps themselves within there. I might be in the minority there. Let me know in the comments if you're a person who prefers the amps as well, just because you've got a lot more tweakability than you have with the capture. The capture for me is like a little bit of a closed off environment. It's not quite like a Kemper profile where you've got like lots of parameters that you could change. In the capture, you've got like bass, middle and treble and gain, right, and volume. I prefer to work with, the idea of the amps that I'm familiar with. I think you get a bit of a better response as well from the actual amp models. Presumably they're a bit more complex in terms of, being able to address issues like sag. So in conclusion, did they change the game as much as they were hoping to? I'm not sure. Let me know as well if you think that this is as revolutionary as they were hoping. I'm way more happy with it as a device now that it has that looper, and I think I could happily, play this for hours. When you're actually playing a device, are you really thinking about like comparisons in your head, or are you just playing the guitar? I think this comparison thing, it makes sense why people are interested in it, but realistically, most of us don't actually do A/B comparisons. And when you do see A/B comparisons done online by someone like Sonic Drive Studios, John, you'll find that these things do pretty much all sound similar enough that you don't really need to worry about that. So I think you should pick the device that you think is going to suit you best. And for a lot of people, I think maybe that is the Quad Cortex. I think they've definitely opened up the idea of having something super powerful, but also super portable. Yeah, I don't know, I really like this preset as well.